Have you ever gotten yourself involved in a project that you thought was worthwhile and would be a help to many others? But then after you started, you realized that your first intentions seemed kind of naive. You never realized how much of this good work would take out of you. The hours, the concern, the frustrations, the interruption of your usual schedule. And sometimes you felt that the time and energy required was consuming all of your time. And maybe some of those close to you would say, hey, this thing seems to be taking over your whole life. Or perhaps your efforts to do good have stirred up opposition from an entrenched group with a vested interest in keeping things the way they were. But you know that it's too late to turn back because you are convinced that your efforts are truly for the good of others. Believe me, folks, I know exactly what I'm talking about here. I have recently been involved with Father Jay and Father Joe and Dawn and Michaela and Siobhan and Janine and D&P Solutions, Inc. in what I've been calling the Mount Everest of projects, trying to combine 10 very different churches, 8 parishes, into one cooperative, loving, collaborative family. Trying to find an equitable way to fund this, and trying to ensure equitable representation without harming a diminishing clergy. Sometimes these initiatives are welcomed by good-souled people, but not always. And you find that your efforts on behalf of the worthy cause, a lot of it is being consumed by time convincing the doubters and resistors. At other times, at all moments of fatigue and frustration, I have observed that there are 2 groups of people. Those who would throw up their hands and go, I quit, or those who stay with the struggle but wonder how they got into this mess in the first place. They say, I don't know, I just thought I was being called to address one need here. I never knew it was going to be difficult. I didn't know what you would ask of me. In all my years, I have heard more than one person with those laments. So, if any of you can identify with anything that I've mentioned so far, then the prophet Jeremiah is your patron saint. Congratulations. Jeremiah, aside from being the author of our first reading, was at heart a gentle spirit and a great lover of people. But then God called him to be a prophet. When he was first called by God, he actually protested, saying, I'm too young. And God told him, don't be afraid. And then he promised to be with him and deliver him. And you can tell from today's reading that Seth did so well, that Jeremiah is going to need that deliverance because even his friends have turned on him. Jeremiah had done exactly what God wanted him to do. He had accused the people of turning from God by relying on local political alliances. Then he predicts doom, but it hadn't happened yet. And so as a result of that, he winds up being the laughingstock. Then he is beaten, jailed, and then released. But after he gets out of jail, he can't stop being the prophet that God called him to be, even though he really felt that God had seduced him and later duped him. Is there any one of us who cannot somehow identify with something in this Jeremiah story? How many times have you felt that you've bitten off more than you can chew? Do you want to shake your fist at God and say, what have you got me into? If you want to do all those things, Jeremiah will stand right with you and encourage you. But he does have more to say. Did you notice midway through that tirade, he says, but. That's when the lament shifts. He returns to God, to whom he first said yes. And then he prays this prayer of thanksgiving. How bold is that? He is anticipating God's vindication of his cause even before he sees it or realizes it. So while Jeremiah stands with us in our complaint, he is also urging us to trust that we will never be abandoned by God. Can we, while standing in the confusing ambiguity and resistance that we sometimes feel when we are trying to do the right thing, can we say with Jeremiah, but the Lord is with me? Can we bring that needed enthusiasm to this awesome, but sometimes really scary project and embrace our very diverse brothers and sisters from our equally diverse 9 other churches? And more, can we take that leap of faith that Jeremiah does and sing God's praises, even while we are still waiting for evidence and reason to do that very thing? And then, in today's gospel passage, Jesus is about to send his disciples right out into a very scary world on a very scary mission. It's massive. It's labor-intensive, fraught with danger. One thing can be said for sure. Jesus is not being subtle here or evasive about what those disciples are to expect. He told them they're going to be hauled into court, flogged in the synagogues, and that their own families would be divided over them, even turn against them. Jesus sums it all up rather succinctly here, and he says, "You will be hated by all on account of me." Jesus' followers should be under no illusions. They are going to face opposition just like he did. But his teachings are not for them to keep to themselves as if they were in some kind of privileged club that meets privately to revere his memory and light some candles before his image. No. If we want to draw others into the mission of Jesus, we must be visible and audible. Jeremiah alone, surrounded by his enemies, trusted that God would stand with him. Likewise, Jesus assures his followers that God, who is so attentive to life that not even a fallen sparrow goes unnoticed, God will take care of those who serve faithfully. And so we live on hope, don't we? We are to live and witness to Jesus and his gospel. We have to trust that someday we will find ourselves acknowledged by Jesus before his Father. Notice that's all in the future tense, though. While our presentation, our situation may not feel like a reward, Jesus promises that our faith and hope in him will be vindicated. we will hear Jesus at our side say to his Father, "Yep, this is the one who proved to be the wise and faithful servant." That is what we all hope and long for.